The sound of splintering wood cracked through the afternoon air like a gunshot, and Isaac Montgomery heard it clear as day from where he sat atop his bay mare on the dusty road that ran past the homestead. He pulled the reins, his weathered hands gentle on the leather, and turned his head toward the small wooden structure standing alone against the Texas plains. Through the open window, he could hear something else now, something that made his chest tighten in a way he had not felt in years. The broken sound of a woman crying. It was late September in 1878, and Isaac had been riding through the outskirts of Amarillo, Texas, for the better part of the morning, checking fence lines for the ranch where he worked. At 32 years old, he had spent most of his adult life in the saddle, moving cattle, mending fences, and keeping to himself. The war had taken much from him, including the young bride he had married just before enlisting. She had died of fever while he was away, and he had returned to find nothing waiting for him but a grave marker and memories that hurt too much to examine closely. He had learned to live with loneliness the way other men lived with old injuries, accepting it as part of who he was now. But that sound, that helpless weeping, pulled at something deep inside him that he thought had died along with everything else. Isaac dismounted, tying his horse to the fence post, and approached the small house with cautious steps. The structure was modest, built of weathered wood that had turned silver gray under the relentless Texas sun. A small garden grew beside it, well-tended rows of vegetables that spoke of careful attention. Chickens scratched in the dirt nearby, unbothered by his presence. He knocked on the door frame, the door itself standing open to let in whatever breeze might offer relief from the heat. The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a startled gasp and the sound of quick movement inside. "Madam," Isaac called out, removing his hat and holding it against his chest. "I heard something break. Are you all right?" There was a long pause, and then a voice, thick with tears and frustration, answered. "I am fine. Thank you for your concern." But she did not sound fine, and Isaac found himself stepping closer to the doorway despite his better judgment. Through the dim interior, he could make out a figure standing near what appeared to be a large wooden frame. As his eyes adjusted to the shadows, he saw her more clearly. A woman perhaps in her middle 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, wisps escaping to frame a face that was red and tear-stained. She wore a simple calico dress, faded but clean, and her hands were trembling as she tried to hold together two pieces of broken wood. "Madam, I do not mean to intrude, but it looks like you could use some help." She turned to face him fully then, and Isaac felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were a striking shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the plains, and they held a depth of sorrow that went far beyond a broken piece of equipment. But there was something else there too, a strength that had not quite been extinguished, flickering like a candle flame in wind. "It is my loom," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. "It was my mother's, and now I have broken it, and I do not know how I will manage without it." Isaac stepped inside, his eyes taking in the modest interior. The house was small but tidy, with a narrow bed in one corner, a small table with two chairs, and the large loom that dominated the main space. Skeins of wool in various natural colors hung from pegs on the wall, and a half-finished piece of fabric still stretched across the broken frame. "May I take a look?" he asked gently. She nodded, stepping back and wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. Isaac moved closer, setting his hat on the table and crouching down to examine the damage. The main support beam had cracked clean through, likely from age and the stress of constant use. Several smaller pieces had splintered as well, but it was not beyond repair. "I am Isaac Montgomery," he said as he studied the break, running his fingers along the grain of the wood. "I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles east of here." "Nora Kensington," she replied, her voice still unsteady. "I have lived here for 6 months now. You live alone?" The question came out before he could stop it, and he immediately regretted how forward it sounded. But Nora did not seem offended. "I do. My husband died 2 years ago, influenza. We had only been married a year." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was barely above a whisper. "The loom was all I had left from before. My mother taught me to weave when I was a girl back in Missouri. She died when I was 16, and my father gave me her loom when I married. After Robert died, I sold nearly everything we owned and came west, thinking I could make a new start. I have been supporting myself by weaving blankets and cloth to sell in town." Isaac understood, more than she could know, what it meant to lose everything and try to build something new from the ashes. "This can be fixed," he said, standing up and meeting her eyes. "The break is clean and the wood is good quality walnut. I will need to fashion a few new pieces, and we will need some strong glue and metal brackets to reinforce the joint, but I can have it working again." Hope flickered across Nora's face, quickly followed by uncertainty. "I cannot pay you much. I have a little money set aside, but not enough for extensive repairs." "I was not asking for payment," Isaac said simply. "I have the time and the skills. No sense in letting a good loom go to waste when it can be mended." "I could not possibly accept such charity," Nora protested, but there was a desperate edge to her voice that told him how much she needed this. "Then do not think of it as charity. Think of it as neighborly help. When I get sick or injured one day, maybe you can return the favor." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she finally nodded. "All right, thank you, Mr. Montgomery. This means more to me than you could know." "Isaac," he corrected gently. "Just Isaac. Then you must call me Nora." He smiled, a real smile that felt foreign on his face after so long. "All right, Nora. I will need to take measurements and head back to the ranch to get my tools and some proper wood. I should be back before sunset." As good as his word, Isaac returned 3 hours later with his saddlebags loaded with tools, wood, and supplies. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed to set the whole prairie aflame. Nora had been watching for him, and she came out to meet him as he dismounted. "I made coffee," she said, gesturing toward the house. "And I have some cornbread left from yesterday if you are hungry." "That would be welcome, thank you." They worked together as the evening settled around them, Isaac carefully measuring and cutting new pieces while Nora held parts steady or fetched tools as he needed them. She lit several oil lamps as the natural light faded, and their warm glow filled the small house with an intimacy that made Isaac acutely aware of her presence beside him. As he worked, they talked. Nora told him about growing up in Missouri, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a farmer. She spoke of her mother's patient hands teaching her to weave, the rhythmic sound of the loom that had filled her childhood. She told him about meeting Robert at a church social, how he had been kind and steady, how they had planned a future together that had been cut short by disease. In turn, Isaac found himself sharing things he had not spoken of in years. He told her about the war, though not the worst of it. He spoke of his own brief marriage, of the woman he had loved and lost. He talked about the years of drifting afterward, moving from ranch to ranch, never quite settling because nowhere felt like home. "Do you think we ever truly get past it?" Nora asked as she watched him carefully apply glue to a joint. "The grief, I mean." Isaac was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think we learn to carry it differently. At first, it is so heavy you can barely stand under the weight, but over time it becomes part of you and you grow strong enough to bear it. It never goes away, but it stops being the only thing you feel. I hope you are right, Nora said softly. There are days when I think I will never feel anything but this hollow ache. You will, Isaac assured her. I promise you that. It was well past midnight when Isaac finally tightened the last bracket and stepped back to examine his work. The loom stood whole again, the new pieces blending reasonably well with the old. It would need a day for the glue to fully set, but structurally, it was sound. There, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Good as new or near enough. Nora came to stand beside him, her eyes filling with tears again, but these were different from the ones he had found her crying earlier. These were tears of relief and gratitude. Isaac, I do not know how to thank you. No thanks needed. I am just glad I could help. She turned to face him, and in the lamplight he could see every detail of her face, the slight upturn of her nose, the full curve of her lips, the way her eyes reflected the flame's glow. You have done more than help. You have given me back my livelihood, my connection to my mother. You have given me hope that I can actually make this work. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Isaac felt his breath catch in his throat, felt an urge to reach out and touch her cheek, to smooth away the track of tears with his thumb. But he held himself back, suddenly aware of how improper this all was, being alone with an unmarried woman in the middle of the night. I should go, he said, though every part of him wanted to stay. The glue needs time to set. Do not try to use it for at least a day, maybe two, to be safe. Of course, Nora said, stepping back and wrapping her arms around herself. Will you come back to make sure it is working properly? If you would like me to, I would. Very much. Isaac gathered his tools, acutely aware of her watching him. As he reached the door, he turned back. Nora, if you need anything at all, the double R is just 5 miles east. Anyone there can find me. Thank you, Isaac, truly. He rode home through the darkness, his mind full of gray-blue eyes and the sound of her voice. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for so long suddenly felt more acute, a sharp contrast to the warmth he had felt in that small house. He tried to tell himself it was just the satisfaction of helping someone in need, of putting his skills to good use. But he knew, deep down, that it was more than that. The next 2 days passed with agonizing slowness. Isaac threw himself into his work, riding fence lines until his backside was sore and his hands were blistered from mending wire. He helped move cattle from one pasture to another, broke a young horse that had been giving the other hands trouble, and volunteered for every task his foreman could think of. But nothing could quite distract him from thoughts of Nora Kensington and her broken loom. On the 3rd day, he could stand it no longer. He told his foreman he needed to check on a repair job he had done, which was not entirely a lie, and headed back toward Nora's homestead. His heart was pounding as he approached, and he felt foolish, like a schoolboy calling on his first sweetheart. She was outside when he arrived, hanging washing on a line stretched between 2 posts. The wind caught her skirts, pressing them against her legs, and loose strands of hair danced around her face. She looked up at the sound of his horse, and her face broke into a smile so radiant that it made his chest ache. "Isaac," she called out, leaving the washing and walking toward him. "I was hoping you would come back." He dismounted, suddenly uncertain. "I wanted to make sure the repairs held." "Have you tried using it yet?" "I have. Come inside and see." She led him into the house, and he saw immediately that the loom was in use. A length of deep blue fabric stretched across it, the color rich and even. Nora moved to the bench and demonstrated, her feet working the treadles while her hands sent the shuttle flying back and forth with practiced ease. The loom held steady, showing no sign of weakness. "It works perfectly," she said, stopping to look at him with shining eyes. "Even better than before, I think. The new supports make it sturdier." "I am glad," Isaac said, and he was, though he knew this meant he had no real excuse to keep coming back. As if reading his thoughts, Nora stood up from the loom and smoothed her skirts nervously. "I wondered if you might stay for supper. It is the least I can do after all your help, and I confess I would enjoy the company. It gets lonely out here sometimes." Relief flooded through him. "I would like that very much." They prepared the meal together, working in the small space with an ease that surprised them both. Nora made biscuits while Isaac fried salt pork and potatoes in her iron skillet. They moved around each other naturally, as if they had been doing this for years instead of days. Over supper, their conversation deepened. Isaac found himself telling her about his childhood in Tennessee, about the small farm where he had grown up, the youngest of 5 brothers. He spoke of how the war had scattered his family, how he had lost 2 brothers at Shiloh and another at Gettysburg. His 2 surviving brothers had gone west to California, and he had not seen them in over a decade. "Do you ever think about finding them?" Nora asked, refilling his coffee cup. "Sometimes, but it has been so long now, and we were never close even before the war. We are strangers who happen to share blood. That must be hard. I always wanted siblings, but it was just me. After my mother died, it was my father and me, and we were close. His death 3 years ago was what pushed me toward marrying Robert. I think I was looking for family again, for someone to belong to." "Did you love him?" Robert? Nora considered the question carefully. "I cared for him deeply. He was good and kind, and he made me feel safe. But if I am honest, I do not think I knew him long enough to truly love him the way you are supposed to love a husband. We were still learning each other when he died." She paused, looking down at her hands. "Does that make me a terrible person to admit that?" "No," Isaac said firmly. "It makes you honest, and there is nothing wrong with marrying for companionship and security. Most marriages are built on far less. What about yours? You said you loved your wife." "I did. Mary was my childhood sweetheart. We grew up on neighboring farms, and I cannot remember a time when I did not love her. When the war started, we married quickly, thinking I would be back in a few months." His voice grew rough with old pain. "I never saw her again. By the time I made it home, she had been dead for over a year." Nora reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm, gentle, and it sent a shock of awareness through him. "I am so sorry, Isaac." He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with hers. "It was a long time ago, and like I told you before, the grief changes. It is still there, but it does not consume me the way it once did." They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined across the table, something new and fragile forming between them. Finally, Nora squeezed his fingers and withdrew, standing to clear the dishes. Isaac helped her wash up, and then, reluctantly, he knew he needed to leave. "May I come back?" he asked at the door, hat in hand. "To visit, I mean. Not for repairs or any other excuse, just to visit." Nora's smile was like sunrise. "I would like that very much." And so began a pattern that would define the next several weeks. Every few days, when his work allowed, Isaac would ride out to Nora's homestead. Sometimes he came in the evening after his work was done, staying for supper and conversation before riding back in the dark. Other times, he managed to get away in the afternoon, and they would sit outside in the shade of her small porch, drinking cool water from her well and talking about everything and nothing. He learned that she loved to read but had few books, so he began bringing her volumes borrowed from the ranch owner's surprisingly extensive library. She discovered that he had a talent for drawing, something he had not indulged in years, and she encouraged him to sketch the prairie landscapes while she worked at her loom. Slowly, carefully, they began to heal each other's wounded hearts. They never spoke directly about what was growing between them, both too wary of their past hurts to rush into naming it. But it was there in every shared glance, every accidental touch, every moment of comfortable silence. One afternoon in late October, Isaac arrived to find Nora in her garden, harvesting the last of her vegetables before the first frost came. He tied his horse and came to help her, and they worked together pulling up potatoes and carrots, cutting squash from the vine, and gathering the final green beans. "This has been a good year for the garden," Nora said, wiping dirt from a particularly large potato. "I should be able to put up enough to get through the winter, and maybe have some extra to sell." "You do good work here," Isaac observed, looking around at the neat rows and healthy plants. "This place has come a long way since you arrived." "I have been thinking," Nora said, not meeting his eyes, "about maybe expanding next year, perhaps getting some pigs or a milk cow. I could make butter and cheese to sell along with the woven goods." "That sounds like a fine plan, but it would require help. The kind of help I could not hire occasionally. I would need someone here, someone I could rely on." Isaac's hand stilled on the squash he had been examining. His heart began to pound. "Nora, what are you saying?" She finally looked at him, her gray-blue eyes uncertain but determined. "I am saying that these past weeks have been the happiest I have been in years. I am saying that when you are not here, I count the hours until you might come again. I am saying that I think about you constantly, and I believe, I hope, that you might feel the same way." He crossed the space between them in 2 long strides, taking her dirt-stained hands in his. "I do. God help me, I do. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I heard you crying over that broken loom. These weeks getting to know you have only made it deeper. I love your strength, your resilience, your gentle heart. I love the way you bite your lip when you are concentrating on your weaving. I love your laugh, and the way you see the good in things even when you have every reason not to." Tears were streaming down Nora's face, but she was smiling. "I love you too, Isaac. I did not think I could feel this way again, but you have brought my heart back to life." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Nora Kensington, I know we have not known each other long, but I am 32 years old and I know my own heart. I do not want to waste any more time. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, soft and gentle at first, then deeper as she melted against him. It was a kiss that held promise and healing, past sorrows acknowledged but not allowed to overshadow future joy. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I will need to speak to the ranch owner, give proper notice. I have some money saved. It is not much, but combined with what you have, we could make a good start here. I can hire on at other ranches for wages, help you expand the homestead." "We will figure it out together," Nora said, her hands resting on his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady under her palms. "That is what matters, together." They made their plans over the following days. Isaac spoke to his foreman at the Double R, a gruff but fair man named Samuel Wright who had seen the change in Isaac over the past weeks and was not surprised by the news. "About time you found yourself someone," Samuel said, clapping Isaac on the shoulder. "You have been alone too long." "When is the wedding?" "As soon as we can arrange it. Neither of us sees the point in waiting." "Well, you have been a good hand, Montgomery. You will be missed, but I am happy for you." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Amarillo with a handful of people in attendance. Samuel Wright came, along with a few other ranch hands Isaac had befriended. Nora had become friendly with a few women in town who bought her woven goods, and they came to stand witness as well. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Isaac kissed his bride with a joy he had not thought he would ever feel again. That night, in the small house that was now theirs together, they came together as husband and wife with a tenderness born of mutual loss and hard-won hope. They took their time learning each other, finding pleasure and comfort in shared touch, in whispered words of love and commitment. And when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, both felt a peace that had eluded them for far too long. The winter that followed was hard in the way Texas winters could be, with cold northers that drove the temperature down and occasional ice storms that made travel treacherous. But inside their small home, Isaac and Nora built a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. Isaac took work where he could find it, hiring on with neighboring ranches for short-term jobs, always making sure he was home before dark. Nora worked at her loom, creating beautiful blankets and cloth that quickly gained a reputation in Amarillo and beyond. The steady clack of the loom became the soundtrack of their life together, a sound that Isaac grew to love because it meant his wife was there, safe and happy and creating something beautiful with her skilled hands. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, Isaac often sketching while Nora mended or knitted. They talked about their dreams for the homestead, about the children they hoped to have, about the life they were building together. Sometimes they spoke of their lost loved ones, keeping those memories alive without letting them overshadow the present. "You think Mary would have approved of me?" Nora asked one night, the question coming out of a comfortable silence. Isaac looked up from his sketch, considering the question seriously. "I think she would have liked you very much. Mary had a generous heart. She would be happy that I found someone to love again, someone who makes me want to be better, to build something lasting." "I think about Robert sometimes," Nora admitted. "I wonder what he would think of all this. I feel guilty sometimes that I am happier with you than I ever was with him." "Do not feel guilty for being happy, Nora. Life is too short and too hard to waste it on guilt for feeling joy." He set aside his sketch and pulled her close. "Robert would want you to be happy, just as Mary would want that for me. We honor their memories by living well, by loving well." "When did you become so wise?" Nora teased, kissing his jaw. "I learned from my very wise wife," he replied, capturing her lips with his own. Spring came early in 1879, the prairie exploding with wildflowers that painted the landscape in brilliant colors. Isaac and Nora worked together to expand the garden, planting twice as much as the year before. True to their plans, they also acquired a milk cow, a gentle beast named Bessie, and 2 pigs that Nora insisted on naming Hamlet and Ophelia, much to Isaac's amusement. "You cannot name animals you plan to eat," he protested. "I can do as I please," Nora countered with a smile. "Besides, we are keeping Bessie and we might decide to breed the pigs instead of eating them. You never know." In truth, Isaac did not mind. He loved seeing Nora so animated, so engaged with the life they were creating. She bloomed in the spring warmth like the flowers on the prairie, her face glowing with health and happiness. It was in early May that Nora shared news that filled Isaac with both joy and terror. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "There is a baby," she said simply. "Our baby." Isaac felt his throat close with emotion. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be." The midwife in town confirmed it. "She thinks the baby will come in late December or early January." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, feeling tears slip down his cheeks. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Nora asked, her own voice thick with tears. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Isaac said. I am terrified and thrilled and overwhelmed and so grateful I can hardly breathe. A baby, Nora, our child." They held each other as the sun slipped below the horizon, both thinking about the future, about the family they were creating together. Isaac thought about all the things he wanted to teach this child, all the love he had to give. Nora thought about holding a baby again, about the weight of new life in her arms, about raising a child in this place they had made their own. The pregnancy progressed well through the summer months, though the heat was hard on Nora. Isaac did everything he could to make her comfortable, taking over more of the heavy work, making sure she stayed cool and well fed. Her belly swelled with their growing child, and he loved to lie with his head resting against her middle, feeling the baby kick and move. "Strong little thing," he would say, marveling at each movement. "Takes after the mother." "Stubborn like the father," Nora would counter, running her fingers through his hair. They spent those months preparing for the baby's arrival. Isaac built a cradle from beautiful oak wood, carving delicate designs into the headboard. Nora sewed tiny gowns and blankets, her hands creating soft, warm things for the child they had not yet met, but already loved beyond measure. In September, they received word that a family was moving into a homestead about 3 miles to the west. Isaac rode over to introduce himself and came back with news that lifted Nora's spirits considerably. "They have 4 children," he told her, "including a daughter about your age named Patricia. She seemed very friendly, and her mother, Helen, said she would come by to visit once they are settled." Having neighbors, especially female neighbors, proved to be a blessing. Patricia and her mother Helen came by the following week, and Nora felt an instant connection with both women. Patricia was 26, warm and outgoing, with a ready laugh and a practical nature that Nora appreciated. Helen was in her late 40s, a capable woman who had raised 6 children and welcomed the prospect of helping with Nora's first. The women began visiting regularly, and the friendships that formed enriched Nora's life in ways she had not expected. She had been alone for so long that having female companionship felt like a gift. They would sit on Nora's porch or in her small house, sharing recipes and stories, laughing together in a way that made Isaac smile whenever he heard it. As autumn arrived and Nora's belly grew large and round, Isaac found himself both eager for and anxious about the coming birth. He had heard too many stories of women who did not survive childbirth, and the thought of losing Nora was more than he could bear. She seemed to sense his fear, taking his hand one evening and making him look at her. "I am strong, Isaac. My mother had an easy time with me, and the midwife says everything looks good. You cannot spend these months worrying about what might go wrong. We have to trust that things will be well." "I am trying," he said, "but I cannot help thinking about all the ways I could lose you. You are my whole world now, Nora, you and this baby." "And you are mine," she said softly, "which is why I need you to have faith. I need you to believe that we are going to be fine, that we are going to welcome this baby together and raise it together and grow old together. Can you do that for me?" He nodded, pulling her close and resting his hand on her swollen belly. "I can. I will." The baby came on a cold January night in 1880, arriving 3 weeks earlier than expected. Isaac had been awakened by Nora's gasp of pain, and he immediately rode through the darkness to fetch the midwife and Helen, who had insisted she be called when the time came. The next 12 hours were the longest of Isaac's life. He paced the small porch, despite the cold, unable to sit still while Nora labored inside. He could hear her cries of pain, and each one felt like a knife to his heart. Patricia's husband Thomas came to sit with him, offering quiet companionship and occasional words of reassurance. "My wife went through this 4 times, Thomas said. It never gets easier to hear, but women are stronger than we give them credit for. Your Nora will be fine. Finally, as dawn was breaking over the prairie, a new sound joined the cold morning air, the lusty cry of a newborn baby. Isaac stood frozen, afraid to hope, until Helen appeared at the door with a broad smile on her face. "Come and meet your son," she said. "Your wife and baby are both well." Isaac nearly fell in his haste to get inside. Nora lay in their bed, looking exhausted but radiant, her hair damp with sweat and her face glowing with joy. In her arms, wrapped in one of the blankets she had woven, was the tiniest person Isaac had ever seen. "Isaac, come meet your son," Nora said, her voice hoarse but filled with wonder. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the small face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was making small sounds, tiny fists waving in the air. Isaac felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "He is perfect," Isaac whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. Immediately, tiny fingers wrapped around his larger one with surprising strength. "Absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold him?" The midwife asked. With shaking hands, Isaac accepted the bundle, cradling his son against his chest. The baby settled immediately, seeming to recognize his father's heartbeat. Isaac looked from his son to his wife, feeling tears stream down his face. "Thank you," he said to Nora. "Thank you for this gift, for being so brave, for giving me a family again." "We gave this to each other," Nora said, reaching for his hand. "We made this miracle together." They named him Ian Robert Montgomery, honoring both their fathers. Ian was a tiny but healthy baby, with a good appetite and strong lungs. Those first weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and constant wonder as they learned to care for this new life they had created. Isaac was amazed by how natural Nora was as a mother, how she seemed to instinctively know what Ian needed. But he was equally surprised by his own fierce love for this tiny person, by how protective he felt, by how he could spend hours just watching his son sleep. "I never knew I could love like this," he confessed to Nora one night as they lay in bed with Ian sleeping in his cradle beside them. "I thought I understood love before, but this is something else entirely." "I know," Nora agreed sleepily. "It is overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at once." As Ian grew, their little homestead seemed to grow with him. The baby's presence brought new energy, new purpose to everything they did. Isaac worked harder than ever, motivated by the need to provide for his family. He took a permanent position with a ranch about 6 miles away, steady work that paid well and allowed him to be home most nights. Nora continued her weaving when Ian's schedule allowed, often with the baby sleeping in a sling against her chest as she worked. Her blankets and cloth were increasingly sought after, with merchants from as far away as Fort Worth placing orders. The extra income allowed them to make improvements to the homestead, adding a second room to the house and expanding the barn. They fell into a rhythm, learning to balance the demands of work, home, and parenthood. It was not always easy. There were nights when Ian would not stop crying, when they were both exhausted beyond measure. There were difficult months when money was tight and worry kept them awake. But through it all, their love for each other and for their son sustained them. When Ian was 6 months old, Patricia and Thomas invited them for Sunday dinner. It was a warm June afternoon, and the two families sat outside under the shade of cottonwood trees, watching the children play. Ian was too young to do more than lie on a blanket and grab at the grass, but he seemed delighted by the activity around him. "You two look happy," Patricia observed, watching Isaac and Nora exchange a smile as Ian giggled at something. "We are," Nora said simply. "Happier than I ever thought possible." "It is good to see," Helen added. She had become something of a mother figure to Nora, filling a void that had existed since her own mother's death. You both deserve this happiness after what you have been through. As the sun set that evening and they prepared to ride home, Isaac lifted Ian into his arms while Nora climbed into the small wagon they now owned. He looked at his wife, at his son, at the life they had built together, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "What are you thinking?" Nora asked, seeing the expression on his face. "I am thinking about the day I heard you crying over that broken loom. I almost rode past, did you know that? I almost decided it was not my business and kept going. But you did not." "No, I did not. And that decision changed my entire life. It brought me you and Ian, and this family I never thought I would have again." Nora reached over and took his hand. "You fixed more than my loom that day, Isaac. You fixed my broken heart. You showed me that it was possible to love again, to trust again, to build a future instead of just surviving." They rode home through the gathering dusk, their baby son sleeping peacefully between them, and both felt the truth of what they had found together. Out of loss and loneliness, out of broken dreams and shattered hearts, they had created something beautiful and lasting. The years that followed brought both joy and challenges, as all lives do. When Ian was 2, they welcomed a daughter, Emma Grace, named for both their mothers. She had Nora's gray-blue eyes and Isaac's stubborn chin, and from the moment she arrived, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. "You said you would not be soft," Nora teased, watching Isaac rock Emma to sleep for the 3rd time that night, unable to let her cry for even a moment. "She is different," Isaac protested. "She is so small. Ian was the same size when he was born." "That was different too," Isaac said, but he was smiling. They expanded the homestead steadily over the years, adding more land, more livestock, and eventually hiring help during the busiest seasons. Nora's weaving business continued to thrive, and she began teaching the skill to other women in the area, sharing the knowledge her mother had passed to her. Isaac became known as one of the most reliable hands in the region, someone who could be counted on to do good work and deal fairly. He also discovered a talent for training horses and began taking on animals that others had given up on, patiently working with them until they became valuable, reliable mounts. Their children grew healthy and strong. Ian proved to have his father's quiet strength and his mother's artistic eye, showing an early talent for drawing that Isaac encouraged. Emma was more outgoing, a bright, curious child who asked endless questions and seemed to fear nothing. When Ian was 6 and Emma 4, Nora realized she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, and there were moments of worry, but in the autumn of 1886, they welcomed another son, whom they named Nathan Samuel, after the foreman who had become a good friend to Isaac. With 3 children, the small house that had once seemed adequate was now bursting at the seams. That winter, Isaac and some neighbors worked together to build a proper addition, creating separate bedrooms for the children and a larger main room that could accommodate their growing family, and the large loom that still held pride of place. "Remember when this whole house was smaller than our bedroom is now?" Nora said one evening, looking around the expanded space. "I remember," Isaac said, pulling her close. "I remember every moment from that first day when I found you crying to this very second, and I treasure all of it. Even the hard parts, even those. They made us who we are." As their children grew older, Isaac and Nora made sure they understood the importance of family, of hard work, and of treating others with kindness and respect. They told Ian, Emma, and Nathan about the loved ones they had lost, keeping those memories alive while also showing their children what it meant to build something new from the ashes of the past. The homestead became known as a place of welcome, where neighbors could always count on help if they needed it, where travelers could find a meal and a place to rest. Nora and Isaac had not forgotten what it meant to be alone and struggling, and they were determined to help others whenever they could. In the spring of 1890, when Ian was 10, Emma 8, and Nathan 3, a young widow with 2 small children appeared at their door, having heard that the Montgomerys sometimes hired help. She was thin and desperate, her children barely clothed, and Isaac and Nora looked at each other and saw their younger selves reflected in this woman's eyes. They hired her immediately, setting her up in a small cabin Isaac built on their property, paying her fair wages for helping with the household and garden work. Over time, they helped her get back on her feet and eventually helped her purchase her own small piece of land. She never forgot their kindness, and years later, when she remarried and prospered, she would always say that the Montgomerys had saved her life. "You are creating a legacy," Patricia told Nora one afternoon as they sat watching their children play together. "Not just for your own children, but for this whole community. People know they can count on you and Isaac." "We are just doing what we wish someone had done for us," Nora said. "Isaac and I both know what it is like to be alone and lost. If we can help others avoid that pain, or at least get through it, then we should." The years continued to pass, marked by harvests and holidays, by births and deaths in the larger community, by the steady rhythm of life on the Texas plains. Isaac's hair began to show silver at the temples, and lines appeared at the corners of Nora's eyes, but they both agreed they had never been happier. Their children flourished. Ian developed into a serious, thoughtful young man who wanted to be a teacher like his maternal grandfather. Emma showed an unexpected talent for business, helping her mother expand the weaving operation and manage the accounts. Nathan was still young, but he showed signs of inheriting his father's way with horses. In 1895, when they had been married for 16 years, Isaac and Nora took a rare day for themselves, riding out to a spot on the prairie they had always loved. It was early autumn, the time of year when they had first met, and the air held that particular quality of light that made everything seem gilded. They spread a blanket and sat together, watching the grass wave in the breeze, listening to the sounds of birds and insects, content in each other's company. "You ever think about that day?" Nora asked. "The day you fixed my loom all the time," Isaac admitted. "It was the day my life truly began again. I had been just going through the motions for so long, existing but not really living. And then I heard you crying and something in me could not just ride past. I was so lost that day," Nora said. "The loom breaking felt like the final straw, like proof that I was never going to be able to make it on my own. I had been crying for hours before you arrived, not just about the loom but about everything. About Robert, about my parents, about how alone I felt." "You are not alone anymore," Isaac said, taking her hand. "No, I am not. And neither are you. We found each other, Isaac. Against all odds, in the middle of nowhere, 2 broken people found each other and built something whole." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 16 years of love and commitment, of shared struggles and shared triumphs. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I would do it all again," Isaac said. "Every hard moment, every challenge, every fear. I would do it all again because it led me to you. And I would break that loom 1,000 times if it meant you would come and fix it," Nora replied. They stayed out on the prairie until sunset, talking and reminiscing, planning for the future. They discussed Ian's plans for college, Emma's ideas for expanding the business, Nathan's desire for a horse of his own. They talked about maybe taking a trip one day to see more of Texas, about growing old together on this land they loved. As they rode home in the gathering darkness, the lights of their house visible in the distance, Isaac felt a profound sense of gratitude. He thought about the man he had been when he first rode past Nora's homestead, carrying his grief like a stone in his chest, unable to imagine ever feeling joy again. And he thought about the man he was now, riding home to a house full of love and laughter, to children who called him Papa, to a wife who had taught him that it was possible to heal. The following years brought changes, as years always do. Ian did indeed go to college, becoming a teacher in Amarillo, and eventually marrying a kind young woman named Sarah, whom he brought home for Sunday dinners. Emma took over most of the business side of Nora's weaving operation, expanding it beyond anything Nora had imagined, while also falling in love with a young rancher named Michael who treated her like a queen. Nathan proved to be a natural horseman, and by the time he was 15, people were bringing horses from all over the region for him and Isaac to train. The young man had his father's patience and his mother's intuitive understanding of what was needed, and together, father and son built a reputation that spread far and wide. In 1902, Isaac and Nora became grandparents for the first time when Ian and Sarah had a daughter. Holding that tiny baby, seeing his son become a father, filled Isaac with an emotion he could hardly name. It was joy and nostalgia and hope all mixed together, a sense of continuity that linked past, present, and future. "We did well," he said to Nora that night as they lay in bed. "Look at what we built. Look at the family we created." "We did very well," Nora agreed, snuggling closer to him. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." More grandchildren followed over the years. Emma and Michael had 3 sons in quick succession, keeping everyone entertained with their energy and antics. Nathan married a sweet girl named Julia and started their family with twin daughters who had their grandmother's gray-blue eyes. The homestead that had started as a small house and a broken loom had become the center of a large, loving family. Sunday dinners often saw 20 or more people gathered around the expanded table, multiple generations sharing food and stories and love. Isaac and Nora grew older gracefully, their hair turning silver, their movements slowing, but their love for each other never diminishing. If anything, it deepened with time, enriched by all they had shared, all they had overcome, all they had built together. On their 30th anniversary in 1908, their children organized a celebration. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, and through it all, Isaac and Nora sat together, hands linked, watching the people they loved celebrate the life they had created. 30 years, Nora said softly, loud enough for only Isaac to hear. "Has it really been that long?" "Feels like yesterday," Isaac replied, "and also like forever. I cannot remember what life was like before you." "I can," Nora said. "It was lonely and hard and gray. You brought color back into my world, Isaac. You brought joy and purpose and love." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You did the same for me, my love. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." As the party continued around them, they slipped away for a moment, walking out to look at the prairie they both loved. The land stretched out before them, vast and beautiful, dotted with the buildings they had added over the years, grazed by livestock they had raised, bordered by fields they had planted. "I have been thinking," Isaac said, "about that broken loom. Do you still have it?" "Of course," Nora said. "It is in the new weaving room. I could never get rid of it, even though I have newer, better looms now. That one is special." "It changed both our lives," Isaac agreed. "A few pieces of broken wood and everything changed." "It was not the loom," Nora said wisely. "It was you." You could have ridden past. You could have offered to fix it and never come back. You could have kept your heart closed off, protecting yourself from the risk of loving again. But you did not. You chose to stop, to help, to stay, to love. That is what changed everything. Isaac pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling her heart beat against his chest. "I chose you," he said. "And I would choose you again and again in every life, in every world. You are my home, Nora. You always have been." They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red and gold. Two people who had found each other in the midst of their brokenness and built something beautiful and lasting. Behind them, the sound of laughter drifted from the house, the voices of children and grandchildren celebrating the love that had started it all. As the years advanced into the new century, Isaac and Nora settled into the peaceful rhythms of their later years. They were not idle in their retirement from the hardest work. Instead, they found new ways to contribute and new joys to experience. Nora spent her days teaching weaving to her granddaughters, passing down the skills her own mother had taught her so long ago in Missouri. She loved watching their small hands learn to work the shuttle, seeing their faces light up when they created their first pieces of cloth. The old loom, the one Isaac had repaired all those years ago, became a teaching tool, and Nora would tell the children the story of how it had brought their grandparents together. Isaac devoted himself to his grandchildren as well, taking the boys and girls out to teach them about the land, about horses, about the value of hard work and honest dealings. He told them stories of the old days, of the war and its aftermath, of the Texas he had known when he first arrived. But he also told them about hope, about second chances, about how love could heal even the deepest wounds. Their children had all settled nearby, creating a community of family that sustained them all. Ian ran the school in Amarillo and was respected throughout the region for his dedication to education. Emma and Michael had one of the most successful ranches in the area, built on Emma's business acumen and Michael's ranching skills. Nathan and Julia continued the horse training operation, with a reputation that brought buyers from as far away as Oklahoma and New Mexico. In the summer of 1912, as Isaac approached his 66th birthday and Nora her 61st, they decided to take the trip they had talked about for years. With their children's encouragement, they traveled by train to San Antonio, seeing parts of Texas they had never visited, staying in hotels, eating in restaurants, experiencing the modern world that was so different from the frontier they had known. But after 2 weeks, they were both eager to return home. The world beyond was interesting, but it was not theirs. Their hearts belonged to the prairie, to the homestead they had built, to the family they had raised. "I am a simple man," Isaac said as their train pulled into Amarillo Station, where Nathan was waiting to collect them. "I like my own bed, my own land, my own people." "We are both simple people," Nora agreed, "and there is nothing wrong with that. We know what matters, and we have built our lives around it." The homestead welcomed them back like an old friend, familiar and comforting. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before, Isaac reached for Nora's hand. "I want to tell you something," he said, "something I have never quite found the words for before. After 34 years of marriage, I thought you had said everything," Nora teased gently. "Not this. I need you to know that every good thing in my life came from the moment I decided to stop and help a crying woman with a broken loom. You gave me everything, Nora. You gave me love and family and purpose. You gave me a reason to wake up in the morning and a peaceful place to lay my head at night. You gave me children who make me proud and grandchildren who fill my days with joy. Every bit of happiness I have known in the last 3.5 decades came from you." Tears were sliding down Nora's cheeks. "Oh, Isaac, you gave me all those things too. You saved me when I was drowning in loneliness and grief. You showed me that my heart could heal, that I could love again, that I could build a future instead of just enduring the present. You gave me a family and a home and a love deeper than anything I had ever imagined. We saved each other." "Yes," Isaac agreed. "We did. Two broken people who found each other and became whole." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to appear, the same stars that had witnessed their first conversations, their first kiss, every moment of their life together. The prairie stretched out before them, peaceful and eternal, and they were content. The years that remained to them were gentle ones, filled with the ordinary miracles of daily life. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin families of their own, creating a fourth generation of Montgomerys on the Texas plains. They celebrated holidays and birthdays, mourned the passing of old friends, and welcomed new neighbors. In 1918, Isaac's health began to fail. He was 72 years old, and his body, worn by decades of hard work, was finally giving out. He faced this final challenge with the same quiet courage he had shown throughout his life, never complaining, always grateful for the time he had been given. Nora tended him with the same loving care she had shown their children when they were sick, sitting by his bedside, holding his hand, sharing memories of their life together. Their children and grandchildren came often, filling the house with love and laughter even in the midst of sorrow. On a warm evening in late May, Isaac called Nora to his side. His breathing was labored, his voice weak, but his eyes were clear and filled with love. "My Nora," he whispered. "My love, my life, my everything." "I am here," she said, gripping his hand tightly. "I am right here, Isaac." "Do not grieve too long for me," he said. "We had a beautiful life, more than I ever deserved. You made me so happy." "You made me happy too," Nora said, tears streaming down her face. "So very happy." "The loom," Isaac said, a small smile on his lips. "That broken loom gave me everything." "Tell the grandchildren that story, Nora. Tell them how brokenness can lead to blessing, how endings can become beginnings." "I will," she promised. "I will tell them. I will make sure they know how we found each other, how we built this family, how love can heal any wound." Isaac's eyes closed and his breathing slowed. "I love you, Nora Kensington Montgomery. I have loved you from the first moment I heard you crying, and I will love you beyond the grave. I love you too, Isaac, forever and always." He slipped away peacefully just as the sun was setting, surrounded by family, his hand in Nora's. He left the world as he had lived in it for the past 40 years, wrapped in love. The grief was profound, a deep ache that Nora carried in her chest. But she had learned long ago that grief was the price of love, and she would not have traded a single moment of their time together to avoid this pain. She had Isaac's children and grandchildren around her, living proof of the love they had shared, and she found comfort in that. Nora lived another 12 years, continuing to weave, continuing to teach, continuing to love her family with the generous heart that had so captivated Isaac all those years ago. She spoke often of her husband, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations, telling and retelling the story of how he had fixed her broken loom, and in doing so, had fixed her broken heart. She died peacefully in her sleep in 1930, at the age of 79, in the house that Isaac had expanded for their growing family. Her children found her in the morning, a peaceful expression on her face, her hand resting on the photograph of Isaac that she kept on her bedside table. They buried her next to Isaac on a hill overlooking the prairie they had both loved, under a sky as wide and blue as the first day they had met. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood around the grave, multiple generations created by the love of two people who had found each other in the midst of loss and built something that would endure long after they were gone. The old loom, the one that had started it all, was given a place of honor in Ian's house. It was carefully maintained and occasionally used, but mostly it stood as a reminder of where they had all come from, of the chance encounter that had created their family. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, the Montgomery descendants would gather around and listen as the oldest among them would tell the story, the one that had been passed down through generations. They would hear about a cowboy who heard a woman crying over a broken loom, who stopped to help instead of riding past, who fixed more than just broken wood that day. They would hear about two people who had lost everything but found each other, who had built a life and a legacy out of shared sorrow and shared hope. The story would end the same way every time, with the reminder that brokenness was not the end, that healing was possible, that love could spring from the most unlikely places. And the children would go to bed thinking about their great-great-grandparents, about the loom and the cowboy and the love that had changed everything. The homestead itself remained in the family for generations, each one adding to it, improving it, but always maintaining the core that Isaac and Nora had built. The prairie around it changed as Texas modernized, but the land itself remained, vast and beautiful, a testament to the enduring nature of what they had created. And on quiet days, when the wind blew just right across the grass, it almost seemed like you could hear the echo of a loom's steady rhythm, the sound of creation and healing, the sound of love made manifest in wood and wool, and the patient work of skilled hands. It was the sound of a broken thing made whole, of two hearts beating as one, of a legacy that would never truly end.